Hello. Today we want to tell about XML out-of-band communications, and my name is Timur Yunusov. I'm a web application security researcher and also Positive Hack Days forums developer, and my colleague Alexey Osipov. He's attack prevention mechanism researcher and security tools developer, and we are also SCADA Strangelove team members. So here is some agenda, but we really hope that most of you are already familiar with them, and somewhere in the middle there will be out-of-band techniques and then some cool videos, and at the last there will be in the end there will be a special time for your questions, so please wait till then if you can. Okay, let's start. Why XML is so popular in last time? XML is so popular, and when can you find it? So very many web servers give possibilities to work not only under HTTP protocol but also provide different APIs. And as you can guess, many of them are XML based. For example, REST interfaces, SOAP, open authorization, and we should not forget that one of the features of XML is human readability. But who on earth would read it? Maybe this guy. There are many parsers and many options controlling their behavior. With great power comes great complexity, thousands of extensions, thousands of options, so what could be better for exploitation? Indeed, more and more attention is being paid to security analysis of protocol and extensions, and that's why many hacker techniques appeared. If you still haven't read publications of Vladimir Vorontsov or Nicolas Grégoire, we strongly recommend you to look at them. And if you don't believe in research, just try to search vulnerabilities with keywords like XML in any vulnerability database, for example CVE, and you will find it. What are entities and what type of entities are there? First of all, there are predefined entities. Some special characters like ampersand or less than or greater than are used for XML markup, so they should be encoded, and that's why we use predefined entities. General entities are variables which substituted and referenced in main document for increasing maintainability and decreasing complexity. And parameter entities are the next step. We can not only define variables but also combine them in doc type. And also general and parameter entities can be internal and defined in current doc type, and external and defined in somewhere else in external resources. So what possibilities provides XML external entities to an attacker, and what we have at this time? First of all, local or remote file access. It's pretty obvious. It is what XML external entities are made for. Then if parser have access to remote resources, we can enumerate services, ports, hosts with time measuring or by error returned to an attacker. In rare cases we can achieve remote code execution, but really not so often, and of course denial of service when we try to read dev random or some big files, or for example by billion lefts attack. Hacker techniques are also evolving. At first we have only direct output from vulnerable script, then some error-based techniques were introduced, for example doc type validation, schema validation, and so on. And at least we got blind techniques, both dichotomy and time measuring brute force, as you can see on slide. During schema validation in Xerxes, for example, with XSD schemas, we can get remote documents or arbitrary documents contents with access restriction option. And in libxml there are also different type of errors which provide this possibility. Some of them you can see on slide, and all of these errors are called with parameter entity, which substituted in referenced in different type of different place of doc type. For example, this one.
Two significant terms in XML processing are terms validity and well-formatedness. Some of them you can see on the slide, and well-formatedness constraint apply always. To these constraints apply opening, closing tags, valid characters, and so on. And validity constraint only applies during validation process, so not every parser would do these constraints. But we will concentrate only on a few of them that gives us possibility to read files and give us some solutions to these issues. So no external entities references in attributes, no tags in attribute values, and parameter entities in internal subset. Here is some simple parsing of document. We define our XML document with the processing instruction with version and encoding. Special mention to encoding. Some parsers obligate that encoding should exist, and if there aren't encoding, this document is not valid and can't be read. We define our doc type, we define parameter entity internal, which accesses local file.xml, and we reference this parameter entity internal in the doc type. Following contents is being substituted in the main document, so we can access entity title in our document. Pretty much obvious. And what are restrictions of XML external entities? We can't read binary files, and not only binary, but tabs, null bytes, and so on. On this URL, you can see what char classes are available. As I already mentioned, we can't read malformat for string if it doesn't contain encoding value, but there are not so many parsers that obligate this. But we have wrappers, which can mitigate these issues by encoding our contents. And not to mention that the resulting document should also be valid, so no external entities in attributes. And let's concentrate on entities in attributes. We have some sample XML document with entity internal, and when we send this document to the parser, we will return pair reference should not exist in attribute value, directly or indirectly. But let's combine two previous examples with parameter entities and entity in attribute. When document is parsed, we access evil host evil XML. It's being substituted, and the contents of evil.xml is on the slide. We define payload entity, which we are going to read, and we define param1 entity, which defines internal entity to access our entity in the main document. And not everything changed, but parsers lose system attributes on these entities, and we can access them everywhere. Where can you find it? For example, x-axis with schema validation, construction like access restriction with the value of test give you possibility to read arbitrary document on server side or client side in errors. And we are going to show you some demo illustrating this process. Here is some sample service which allow you to validate XML documents with their schemas. This validator is one of the most popular search engines in Russia. And here's a sample document which were on previous slide. We have schema, we have doc type, and it's been substituted in the pattern value. We're sending this document to parser, but we also need some XML document to be read and not to pass the validation. So we sent in some sample document. And what we got? We got the contents of this file. Why we haven't added doctype in the main document? Because in the main document doctype was forbidden, and if you add it, the parser will return an error. Let's continue to our main technique with out of band.
Okay, that was interesting, but still not out of band. What was the major problem of XML injections? We think that we need to get some output from vulnerable parser. That's why most attacks attracted to different server-side services, and maybe the only attack which involved XML and targeted to clients was Adobe XML external entity same origin policy bypass, which was introduced in January. So what we want from out of band? We want to get contents without any direct output. Out of band is not something new. It was used in SQL injections with DNS queries, which we can call in SQL queries. Attacker can send payload from database to his server and bypass firewalls with these functions like UTL, HTTP request, and file exist, and so on. So let's demonstrate our main technique. We send to server specially crafted XML document with defined doctype. In doctype there are definition of parameter entity remote, and when remote is referenced, it accesses to evil host evil.xml, and there are parameter entity payload. It is external entity which accesses C bootini, for example, and there is definition of parameter entity internal, which have contained definition of parameter entity trig. And while all this construction is substituted, it turns into this, and you can see that parameter entity payload is already substituted, and content of bootini is already substituted in URI. That's why when trig is referenced, parser sends contents of boot.ini to evil host. And here is some visualization. Здесь мы не поправили. We have an attacker, we have a vulnerable parser, and evil host machine controlled by attacker. We send specially crafted XML document, then server accesses to evil host for external part of doctype. Evil host returns evil.xml with our payload. Server continues to parse in doctype and accesses some of its internal resources, file system or intranet, and send data in HTTP requests to evil host and profit. So if parsing of external doctype is restrictive, then resend data in out-of-band manner is even more complicated. First new restriction is that pair references forbidden in internal subset. That means that there should exist at least two documents. First document that we will send to server, and second document that we will send with our payload. And that means that we need to send two files to server, or server need to get to have access to our remote resource. And here come wrapper data, which can mitigate this restriction. Secondly, different type of quotes can mess up declaration of last entity, as you can see on slide. That's why we cannot read files which contains both single and double quotes. HTML is flexible, that's why not every page would be read. And spaces, line feeds, and other special characters which should not appear in URI in an escaped state. And here again come wrappers. We can encode these symbols in base 64, or some good parsers encode these symbols and send us normal string. Returning to the statement that there are different parsers and different options, here is an example how to load our entities. We can use external doctype, we can use external doctype subset, or we can use parameter entities only methods. We can use XSD schemas, XSLT templates, and so on. And here is some actual vectors to fuzz. If XSLT and XPath is very useful where we need to convert one XML to another XML, so why not use it in evil purposes? Here is an example how to send sensitive data from sensitive hosts in out-of-band channel. We define payload variable, then we concatenate it with prefix evil, and then we send, then we request result in URI and send data in out-of-band channel.
And this is already possible with XSLT 1.0. New versions give new functions like unparsed text, when you can read not only XML data, but also every data that is accessible to parser. We can enumerate services and hosts with functions like document available or unparsed text available. And different conversions give us possibility to convert characters that can be sent in URI with their hex values, for example. And some days ago, there were proposals to XSLT 2.0 that give possibility to read binary files. So in some time, we can read even SQLite database and so on. And some demo illustrating XSLT with the DNS requests. Here's our tool that serves DNS requests and some XSLT document. There are some functions like hexlify and cycle4 to read contents in chunks and to hex them. As you can see, a variable SKI doesn't contain some characters. They can't be read in XML, so we substitute this with tildes. Then we reference our documents and what we are going to read. This cycle 4. We are accessing our specially crafted DNS server, and we are going to read file web.config with the following XPath. And we are going to read attributes like key and value. Let's see what document we are going to read. Here's this document. It contains some sensitive data like username or password, and we are going to read its contents. We are sending our XSLT document to the parser and see what happens. There are plenty of DNS requests to our server, and we lost 9th request, so there were some problems in network. Let's decode these values to see that this actual data that we were going to read. We're decoding username, and let's end this demonstration because on the screen it's not readable. Decode, and we got username. If you decode every other data, there will be a password, and we received our data. XML, what are you doing? Summary. For server side, we now issue DNS request, HTTP request, HTTPS, SMB requests, and so on. We are not constrained by errors or data output or any output from the parser. And client side, nobody has tried to hack themselves, so lots of products became vulnerable because you have no access to the client, but the client have access to you. Let's see what different parsers do with our techniques. For example, Microsoft with system.xml all encodes all query string for out-of-bag technique. It saves all line feeds and attributes. But we can't, as already mentioned, we can't read some documents because of lack of encoding declaration. But the web.config is often readable, and it has no wrappers except system ones. Xexis is nice. It can read directories, it sends interim authentication data, and it has different wrappers like Gopher. But for our techniques, it converts all line feeds to spaces when inserting into attributes, so we lose some data from it. And we can't read multi-line files with out-of-band technique, because some characters like line feeds are not converted and mess up the HTTP request. libxml may be most liberal parsing. It has different wrappers like expect or data, and data for the main document is external resource, so we can send only one file to the parser, and parser will do what he have to do. And if you access this URL, you can see a nice presentation by Alexey Moskvin that passes some with some different PHP parsers. And on negative side, we can't read big files by default, but this option is often enabled. This is summary table of our technique. Not every mentioned parser have all our issues, but you can fast, so it's our gift to you. And some demo. We start our tool, we start some browser, we don't know what it is, and we're accessing file load.html. As you can see, there's some JavaScript with a static line with the XML, which is going to be parsed every 5 seconds. So when this document is parsed, it accesses our server, and the server returns file that we are going to read. Let's start our console, where we can access different files from the host. As you can see in the log, this document is already accessed our server. Let's try to read the file 1aa.txt. It doesn't exist, so we returned cannot read. Let's define drive letter, and some contents, scrappy contents of this file will be returned. It's some data returned. Now let's load some sensitive data. It's win.ini, and its contents received to our console. Let's read boot.ini. And the contents of this file is returned. Let's see that it's not a fake, and access the file interactive on our server. If we access without sending the data to our console, it will return nothing, so no document is available. If we send to our console some file to be read, it will return the XML with our payload. no accesses from XML parser because we changed our URL. Sending XML to the contents, reload, and here it is, our blah blah blah. What are tools we would like to provide? It's XXE out-of-band exploitation toolset for automation with some abbreviation, and it has DNS knocking server. We can access this some DNS service, and it will return in log that there were actual content. It's for enumeration that the path is available and bypassing firewalls and so on. It has vector set with XLT, MS XML, and so on, with different vectors which you can access. It has HTTP server that can read arbitrary length of query strings, so we are not constrained by a page, for example, that can access only 8 kilobytes of query string. And special thanks to Vyacheslav Yegoshin, he created Metasploit module, so we would like to add this module to the Metasploit framework. It has vector set, HTTP server, and receives some data. Let's see what this. Let's see some demo with this tool. We are accessing, it's our evil host. We define our exploit, we define our settings, and we define the file we are going to read. It's cbutini throughout our presentation. You already see it. And start our exploit. Some actual vector to the client side. Here's GitHub with some sample product or some sample project. We are not going to compile it. We're not going to start it, and so on. We will see the source of this code. Nothing special. We download it, unpack, and load it with some developer studio. Oops, some problem. We cannot access this document. But what will be on our evil host? On evil host, we return the contents of boot.ini. How it is possible? Let's see some product files. We are opening nice project file and one sample string in it, accessing evil host, bypassing all same origin policies, and so on. What are conclusions? General ruination? General ruination, maybe. It's not our phrase, but many client-side products became vulnerable, so there will be more and more advisories to the vendors. We have a tool set, and we are going to publish it. And we have new idea. We think that we granted you new ideas for new vectors and new applications that became vulnerable, and that XML protocol is not as simple as it might be. Special thanks to these guys who helped us with the product, and special thanks to some other guys. Some of them on this video. Video is self-explainable. If you have some questions, you are welcome to ask.